Hey guys, welcome to RedSunStories. Hope you're doing well. Tonight, we journey to Mount O, where a demon king 50 feet tall with 15 eyes ruled from darkness, devouring noble maidens, until 5 warriors climbed the mountain with poisoned wine and impossible courage. This is the legend of Shuten-doji, Japan's most fearsome oni. So, before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments what time it is for you. I would love to connect with you guys. Now, let's dive into tonight's story together. The screams had been echoing from Mount O for 3 months when the emperor finally summoned Minamoto no Yorimitsu. 15 noble maidens gone, daughters of the highest families in Heian-kyo, stolen in the night by shadows that moved faster than guards could react, leaving only torn silk and the scent of sake hanging in the air. The imperial diviner, the great Abe no Saime himself, had performed his mystical arts beneath the full moon, casting his divination sticks again and again, and each time they revealed the same terrible truth: Shuten-doji. The name alone made seasoned warriors pale. The drunken demon, king of the Oni, ruler of Mount O. Some said he stood 50 feet tall with skin that shifted colors like storm clouds, yellow, blue, black, and white limbs moving with impossible power. 5 massive horns sprouted from his skull, each one thick as a temple pillar. 15 eyes bulged beneath those horns, capable of seeing through any deception, any disguise, any lie. In his dark fortress carved deep into the mountain caves, he drank sake from human skulls and devoured the flesh of maidens raw, their screams his evening entertainment, their blood his wine. His gang of Oni, led by his terrible lieutenant Ibaraki-doji, another demon child transformed by darkness, terrorized the highways with supernatural strength that no human warrior could match. When Yorimitsu received the emperor's command in the Hall of State Affairs, even he, the legendary demon slayer who had faced down supernatural evil across the realm, felt the weight of impossible odds. The scroll trembled slightly in his hands as he read the imperial decree. Behind the silk screens, he could hear the quiet weeping of noble fathers who had lost their daughters to the mountain. The capital itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Because the screams from Mount O continued, night after night, carried on the northwestern wind, and someone had to make them stop. But how do you kill something that cannot die? How do you fight 50 feet of demonic rage with 15 eyes that see all, and 5 horns that gore steel like paper? Yorimitsu stood in the palace courtyard after the audience, looking northwest toward the distant purple shadows of Mount O, and wondered if this would be the mission that finally ended his legend. The evening air smelled of plum blossoms and incense, the refined elegance of Heian court life. Out there, beyond the city's careful beauty, darkness reigned. A demon king sat on a throne of stolen bones, drinking and laughing, thinking himself invincible. The warrior's hand moved unconsciously to his sword, Hijikiri, the beard cutter, legendary blade passed down through generations. Some called it Dojigiri Yasutsuna now, demon child cutter, though it had not yet earned that name. Not yet, but perhaps soon, if the gods were willing and courage proved sufficient. Perhaps very soon, that blade would taste Oni blood, and the mountain would know silence again. Yorimitsu closed his eyes and listened to the wind from the northwest. Yes, there, barely audible across the miles, the faint echo of screaming, the distant sound of something massive moving in darkness. The demon was awake and feeding, and the night was still young. To understand what Yorimitsu faced, one must understand what Shuten-doji had become, and what he had been before darkness claimed him entirely. The stories conflicted, as old stories do, each version carrying its own truth, its own warning. Some said he was born human in Echigo province, in the snow-heavy mountains of what would later be called Niigata, a child born with strange red eyes and unnatural strength, ostracized by villagers who feared what they could not understand. Other tales placed his birth at Mount Ibuki in Omi province, where his mother was human, but his father was something far older, the great dragon Yamata no Orochi itself, the eight-headed serpent that had terrorized ancient Japan until the storm god Susanoo struck it down. Dragon blood flowing through human veins, creating something that belonged to neither world fully. Whatever his origins, the transformation followed a pattern of exile and rage. The child who would become Shuten-doji was cast out, abandoned, feared. Perhaps he turned to dark practices seeking power. Perhaps he discovered forbidden sake brewed with strange herbs and stranger rituals. Perhaps he simply embraced what he was born to be. But gradually, terribly, he changed. His body grew massive. His skin took on the shifting colors of supernatural beings. One arm yellow as jaundice, one blue as drowning, one black as burnt flesh, one white as bleached bone. Eyes multiplied across his face and skull. Horns erupted from his head. His appetites became insatiable, for sake, for flesh, for blood, for the screams of the terrified. He was not alone in his transformation. Others joined him, outcasts and criminals, thugs and rebels, those society had rejected or wronged. They formed a gang in the Hira Mountains near the capital, and Shuten-doji taught them his dark arts. One by one, they too transformed, becoming Oni through ritual and rage and the consumption of forbidden things. Among them was Ibaraki-doji, who some said was the most beautiful youth in Japan before darkness took him, and who became Shuten-doji's most loyal servant, his lieutenant, his brother in monstrosity. For years, they terrorized the region from their mountain stronghold, raiding villages, stealing sake and livestock, and occasionally people. They were dangerous but contained, a known threat that samurai could occasionally challenge. But then the Buddhist monks built Enryaku-ji Temple on Mount Hiei in the Hira Range, sacred ground, holy architecture. The spiritual power of the monastery drove the Oni gang out like smoke before wind. In 849, during the reign of Emperor Ninmyo, Shuten-doji and his followers fled northwest to Mount O, to caves and peaks that had never known human settlement, to darkness that welcomed them. And there, nursing his displacement and rage, feeding on isolation and hatred, Shuten-doji truly became the Demon King. His fortress grew. Caves expanded into halls, natural caverns carved into throne rooms, the mountain itself warped by supernatural presence. His power magnified, his ambitions swelled. He no longer simply survived and raided. He plotted. He planned. He looked southeast toward the glittering capital of Heian-kyo, where emperors ruled and nobles lived in elegant refinement, and he decided that one day he would sit on that throne instead. One day he would rule, and those who had cast him out would kneel or be devoured. For over a century, he bided his time, gathering strength, perfecting his dark arts, building his demon army. The mountain became legend, a place of shadows and screaming, where travelers vanished and prayers went unanswered. But he remained contained, distant, a nightmare whispered about, but not confronted. Until the reign of Emperor Ichijo, near the end of the 10th century, when Shuten-doji decided the time had come to announce himself to the capital in a way that could not be ignored. He would take their daughters. He would feast on their nobility. He would make them understand that a new power ruled the night, and no gate could bar it, no guard could stop it, no prayer could turn it aside. The shadows came to Heian-kyo, and the screaming began. The first maiden vanished on a moonless night in the 9th month. Lady Akiko, 16 years old, daughter of a high-ranking minister. She had been sleeping in the women's quarters of her family's compound, surrounded by attendants behind multiple locked doors, with guards patrolling the walls. In the morning, they found her room empty, the window shutters torn from their hinges, claw marks gouged deep into the wooden frame. A smell lingered. Sake and something else. Something that made the guards' hands tremble as they lit incense to cover it. The smell of the charnel ground, of meat rotting in summer heat, of something that should not walk under heaven's gaze. Abe no Semi was summoned. The great Onmyoji arrived with his divination tools and his ancient knowledge, his face grave as he examined the room. He said little, but those who watched saw his expression darken as he cast his fortune sticks, as he read the patterns of supernatural intrusion. When he left, he went directly to the emperor with his findings, and though the content of their private audience remained secret, those who served in the palace noted that His Majesty's hands shook during the evening meal, and he did not sleep that night. 2 weeks later, the second maiden disappeared, then a third, a fourth. The pattern was clear and terrible. Only daughters of the highest nobility, only young women of marriageable age, only the most beautiful and refined. The families built higher walls, hired more guards, hung protective sutras and sacred ropes. Nothing helped. The shadows moved through defenses like morning mist, and in the morning, another room would stand empty. Another family would keen their grief. Another set of claw marks would mar fine wooden architecture. By the time the 15th maiden vanished, Heian-kyo had transformed. The jewel of culture and refinement, the carefully planned capital where poetry and elegance ruled, now cowered behind shuttered windows as soon as dusk approached. Noble families barricaded their daughters. Priests performed endless purification rituals. The streets fell silent after dark, and from the northwest, carried on certain winds, came sounds that made people press hands over their ears and pray loudly to drown them out. Laughter, massive, booming laughter, and beneath it, sometimes, if you listened despite yourself, you could hear screaming. Abe no Saime performed his great divination in the palace courtyard under the full moon of the 10th month, with Emperor Ichijo himself watching from behind screens. The Onmyoji burned sacred woods and chanted ancient formulas, cast his sticks upon cloth marked with mystical symbols, entered the trance state where spirits could speak and futures could be glimpsed. What he saw made him cry out, breaking his own ritual meditation. When he regained composure, his message was clear and terrible. Mount Oe, Shuten-doji. The Demon King, awake and hungry, plotting not just to feed but to conquer, building his power through consuming noble blood, planning to descend on the capital with his Oni army and claim the chrysanthemum throne itself. The abductions were not random predation. They were preparation. Each maiden devoured added to his power. Each drop of noble blood drunk strengthened his dark magic. He was feeding himself toward apotheosis, toward becoming something that could challenge even the gods themselves. And there, in the mountain caves of his fortress, the captive maidens who still survived were kept in iron cages, fed barely enough to survive, saved for special feasts or particular rituals. Their families' desperate prayers reached heaven, but found no answer, because prayers alone could not pierce the darkness that Shuten-doji had woven around his domain. The emperor had no choice. The capital could not cower forever. The demon would not stop until he sat on the throne or was destroyed. And so the summons went out to the one warrior in all the realm who might have even the smallest chance of success. Minamoto no Yorimitsu, demon slayer, hero of 100 battles against supernatural evil, commander of the legendary 4 heavenly kings, warriors whose names alone inspired courage. But even Yorimitsu, when he stood before the emperor and heard the full accounting, felt ice in his belly and doubt in his heart, because he had fought Oni before. He had faced supernatural evil in many forms, but Shuten-doji was not merely an Oni. He was the king of Oni. 50 feet of impossible power, 15 eyes that saw truth through lies, 5 horns that had gored legendary warriors, strength enough to tear temples apart, magic older than the current dynasty, and an army of transformed demons loyal unto death. How do you fight such a thing? How do you even approach it without being spotted, captured, devoured? Conventional warfare was impossible. A frontal assault would be suicide. Even with his 4 heavenly kings, Sakata no Kintoki with his legendary axe, Urabe no Suetake with his supernatural strength, Usui Sadamitsu with his wisdom, Watanabe no Tsuna with his unwavering courage, even with these heroes at his side, Yorimitsu could not simply march to Mount Oi and challenge the demon to battle. But the screams continued. The capital waited. The emperor had commanded, and Yorimitsu was, above all else, a loyal servant of the throne and a warrior who did not flee from impossible duty. He bowed low before the emperor, accepted the mission, and left the palace to gather his men and somehow find a way to kill the unkillable. The mountain waited, wreathed in unnatural mist even in clear weather, and within its depths something massive stirred and laughed and drank deep from skull cups, waiting for more delicacies to be delivered to its door. Yorimitsu's estate lay in the northeastern district of the capital, a warrior's compound where weapons hung on walls alongside poetry scrolls, where the elegance of Heian culture blended with the practical necessities of those who fought supernatural evil. He summoned his 4 heavenly kings that same evening, and they came immediately, knowing by his expression that the matter was grave beyond measure. Sakata no Kintoki arrived first, the red-skinned warrior whose superhuman strength was legendary, who had been raised by a mountain witch and carried an axe that could split boulders. Despite his fearsome appearance and power, Kintoki possessed a straightforward nobility that Yorimitsu had always trusted. He took one look at his commander's face and simply nodded, waiting for the others. Urabe no Suetake came next, the strongest wrestler in the realm, a man who could pin Oni to the ground through sheer physical prowess. His hands were scarred from a lifetime of grappling with things that should not exist, and his eyes held the calm of someone who had looked into the abyss many times and never flinched. Usui Sadamitsu entered quietly, the strategist of the group, the one who thought 3 moves ahead in every battle. His intelligence had saved them more times than his sword, though his blade skills were formidable. He saw patterns others missed, weaknesses in supernatural defenses, ways to turn disadvantage into victory. Finally, Watanabe no Tsuna strode through the gate, the most loyal of them all, the man who would follow Yorimitsu into the deepest hell without question or hesitation. Tsuna's courage was absolute, his dedication total. If Yorimitsu pointed at death and said, "We go there," Tsuna would simply draw his sword and lead the way. In the main hall, with sake poured and weapons displayed, Yorimitsu told them everything: the abductions, Abe no Seime's divination, the Emperor's command, the nature of their target, Shuten-doji, the demon king of Mount O, 50 feet of supernatural terror, a creature against whom conventional warfare was suicide. The room fell silent when he finished. These men had faced death alongside him countless times. They had fought yokai and ghosts, evil monks and corrupted spirits. But this was different. The weight of impossibility hung in the air like smoke. Kintoki spoke first, his voice a low rumble. "How tall did you say? 50 feet? That's what the divination revealed," Yorimitsu confirmed. 4 limbs, each a different color. 15 eyes, 5 horns. Strength enough to tear our bodies apart like wet paper. "And his gang?" Suetake asked, practical as always. "At least a dozen other Oni, maybe more, led by Ibaraki-doji, who is nearly as powerful as Shuten-doji himself. All of them transformed, all supernatural strength and dark magic, all loyal to their king." Sadamitsu leaned forward, his analytical mind already working. "Then we cannot fight them directly. We need another approach. Stealth, perhaps? Assassination? 15 eyes, Tsuna reminded him quietly. "How do you hide from 15 eyes?" The silence returned, heavier than before. Outside, a nightbird called, its voice lonely in the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, toward the northwest, thunder rumbled, though the sky was clear. Or perhaps it was not thunder, but something else. Something massive, moving in mountain caves, shifting its weight, making the earth tremble. Yorimitsu stood and walked to the wall where his swords hung. His hand rested on Higekiri's scabbard, feeling the ancient power contained within the blade. "The Emperor has given us this task because we are the only ones who might succeed. Not because success is likely, but because it is marginally less impossible for us than for anyone else. We go to Mount O. We find a way into the fortress. We kill Shuten-doji. We free any captives who still live. We end this nightmare. And if we fail," Kintoki asked bluntly, "then the capital falls eventually. The Demon King descends with his army. The Heian era ends in blood and darkness." Yorimitsu turned to face them, and his expression was grim but determined. "Failure is not acceptable, so we will not fail. Somehow we will find a way." Tsuna rose to his feet, drawing his sword and laying it across his palms in formal offering. "My blade is yours, Commander, now and always. If we face death, we face it together." One by one, the others followed suit. Kintoki with his massive axe, Suetake with his wrestler's bare hands clenched in resolve, Sadamitsu with his sword and his sharp mind pledged to finding the solution, the weakness, the way through impossible odds. They spent the night planning, discussing approaches, acknowledging the gaps in their knowledge. They would need to travel to Mount O first, scout the terrain, find the fortress entrance. They would need to somehow get close, without being detected by 15 eyes. They would need to strike before the demon's overwhelming power could be brought to bear. They would need, essentially, a miracle. But Yorimitsu did not say that. He let his men sleep in the hours before dawn, beds rolled out in the main hall, weapons close to hand. He stood watch alone, looking northwest toward the mountains he could not see in the darkness, thinking about duty and death, and the daughters still screaming in iron cages, waiting for heroes who might never come or might arrive too late. Just before dawn, he prayed, not to Buddha, not to the kami, but simply to whatever force in the universe might take pity on 5 mortal men attempting the impossible. If they were to have any chance at all, they would need help beyond the human realm. They would need divine intervention, supernatural aid to match the supernatural evil they faced. And perhaps, Yorimitsu thought as first light touched the eastern sky. Perhaps the gods were listening after all. Perhaps they too were tired of the screaming from Mount O. Perhaps they would provide a way, a weapon, a strategy that mortal minds alone could not conceive. Or perhaps 5 warriors would simply march to their deaths with honor, and the capital would have to find some other salvation, some other hero, because these 5 proved insufficient against the king of demons. Either way, the journey would begin at sunrise. Mount O waited, and time was running out for the captives who still breathed in their iron cages, counting their remaining hours, praying to every deity they knew for rescue that seemed impossible. The warriors of light were coming, but would light be enough against such profound darkness? The dawn broke red over Heian-kyo, red as blood, red as demon eyes, red as the silk robes of maidens torn apart in mountain feasts. Yorimitsu watched it rise and felt no comfort in its beauty. He simply tightened his sword belt, woke his men, and prepared to march toward death or glory, whichever the gods deemed appropriate. The mountain waited. The demon laughed, and 5 humans took their first steps on a road that might end civilization's nightmare or add 5 more corpses to the piles already rotting in caves no sunlight reached. They left the capital dressed as Yamabushi, mountain ascetic priests who wandered the wild places seeking enlightenment through hardship and isolation. It was Sadamitsu's idea. Demon or not, Shuten-doji had once been raised in human society. He would recognize warriors in armor as threats to kill immediately. But Yamabushi were holy men, wanderers, potentially useful for their supernatural knowledge, or at least entertaining in their tales and prayers. It was a thin disguise, but perhaps thin enough to get them inside the fortress before the demons. Suspicions rose to murderous action. Yorimitsu led them dressed in the white robes and conch shell horns of the mountain priests, their weapons concealed beneath layers of religious garb, prayer beads clicking at their wrists. They carried staffs instead of spears, wore sedge hats instead of helmets, looked every bit the holy wanderers seeking remote shrines and mountaintop meditations. Only their eyes betrayed them, too sharp, too watchful, the eyes of warriors scanning for threats rather than monks seeking transcendent peace. The road northwest from Heian-kyo wound through increasingly wild terrain. Cultivated rice fields gave way to bamboo forests, then to deep woods where ancient cedars blocked the sun and moss covered everything in velvet silence. The few villages they passed seemed smaller, more isolated, their inhabitants eyeing the travelers with mixed relief and suspicion. Relief that holy men passed through, suspicion that anyone would travel toward Mount O rather than away from it. In one village, an old woman selling tea whispered warnings. "Turn back, holy men. Nothing good waits on that mountain. The darkness has been growing there for more than 100 years. We hear things in the night. Laughter that shakes our shutters. Footsteps too heavy to be human. Screams that echo from the peaks when the wind is right. No one goes to Mount O anymore. Not even hunters. Not even the desperate." Yorimitsu thanked her gravely, paid for the tea with more coin than it was worth, and continued northwest. Behind him, Kintoki muttered under his breath about bad omens and worse odds. Tsuna simply walked steadily onward, his hand never straying far from the weapon hidden beneath his robes. By the 3rd day, the terrain had become truly forbidding. The road narrowed to a trail, then to barely a path, then to nothing but deer tracks and stone markers left by forgotten travelers. The trees grew massive and dark, their branches woven so thick that even midday felt like twilight. No birds sang, no animals moved. The forest held its breath, as if afraid that any sound might attract attention from the mountain ahead. And Mount O rose before them now, no longer a distant purple shadow, but an immediate presence, its peak wrapped in clouds that never seemed to move, its slopes dark even where sunlight should have reached. Unnatural mist clung to ravines and pooled in valleys. The smell changed too. Underneath the forest scent of earth and rot came something else, something that made the warrior's hands move unconsciously toward hidden weapons. Sake, blood, the reek of the charnel ground, the smell of a predator's den where bones piled up and meat hung rotting because the creature was too confident to clean its kills. They made camp that evening in a ravine, no fire, cold rice and dried fish their meal. The forest silence pressed down like a physical weight. Somewhere in the darkness above them, the fortress waited. Somewhere up there, Shuten-doji sat on his throne of bones, perhaps drinking, perhaps feasting, perhaps simply waiting with 15 eyes watching approaches to his domain, 5 horns gleaming in torchlight, 50 feet of terrible majesty contemplating which maiden to devour next. Suetake took first watch. Sadamitsu used the time to review their plan once more, finding holes, acknowledging uncertainties. "Even if we get inside," he whispered, "even if the disguise works, how do we kill him? He's 50 feet tall. Our swords would be like needles to him. Kintoki's axe might wound him, but a wounded demon is still a demon. We need something more, some weapon we don't have." "We need the gods on our side," Tsuna said quietly, and no one disagreed because they all felt it. This mission required more than human skill. It required divine providence, supernatural assistance to match supernatural evil. Without that, they were simply 5 men marching to noble but pointless deaths. Yorimitsu didn't sleep. He sat with his back against stone, hand on his hidden sword, and thought about the Emperor's desperate eyes, about families weeping for stolen daughters, about the screams that echoed from the mountain nightly. Duty drove him forward. But duty alone wouldn't be enough to survive what waited above. He knew that in his bones, in the instinct that had kept him alive through countless battles, they were missing something. Some element, some tool, some intervention that would make the impossible merely extremely difficult. The night deepened. The mist grew thicker. And then, in the hour before dawn when spirits walked most freely, 3 figures emerged from the fog. Old men, all 3 of them, dressed in traveling clothes of ancient style, leaning on staffs, moving with the careful steps of those well advanced in years. They should not have been there in that ravine, in that darkness, in that wilderness where even animals fled. But there they stood, smiling gently at the 5 warriors who had surged to their feet with hands on concealed weapons. "Peace, brave men," the first old man said, his voice surprisingly strong despite his apparent age. "We mean no harm. We are simply fellow travelers on this mountain road." "There is no road here," Sadamitsu said carefully, analytical mind racing through possibilities. "And no one travels to Mount O, not anymore." The second old man chuckled, a warm sound in the cold darkness. "Perhaps that's why we travel here. Where else can old men find peace and quiet? Everyone avoids this mountain, perfect for our meditations." The third old man studied them with eyes that seemed too bright, too knowing. "Though we suspect your purposes are not meditation, brave Yamabushi, we suspect you seek something more dangerous in the heights above." Yorimitsu stepped forward, instinct telling him these were not ordinary travelers, but offering no sense of threat. "If you know what waits on this mountain, old father, then you know why we've come. And perhaps you know also that we face odds no human strength can overcome. Perhaps the first old man agreed. But perhaps human strength is not all that's available to those who serve righteousness and defend the innocent. Tell us, warrior who dresses as priest, what is your purpose on Mount O? There seemed no point in deception. We hunt Shuten-doji, the demon king who steals maidens and plots to conquer the capital. We go to kill him and free his captives. A noble purpose, the second old man said. But as you say, impossible for human strength alone. The demon is too powerful, too large, too well defended by supernatural ability and a fortress full of loyal Oni warriors. We know, Kintoki rumbled. We go anyway. We die anyway, if die we must. But someone has to try. The three old men looked at each other, some communication passing between them without words. Then the first stepped forward, reaching into his traveling pack. Then take these gifts, brave warriors. Gifts for your noble purpose from those who also wish to see evil ended and innocence preserved. He drew out a ceramic jar, sealed with wax and marked with symbols that seemed to shimmer in the pre-dawn darkness. Special sake, he said, pressing it into Yorimitsu's hands. Sacred vintage, brewed by methods older than temples, infused with divine power. If Oni drink this, they will find themselves drowsy and weak, their supernatural strength fading like morning mist. But if humans drink it, it will affect them not at all. The second old man produced a helmet, finer than any armor Yorimitsu had seen, light as silk but clearly strong beyond normal metal. Wear this when you strike, he said, and you will find it protects against even supernatural attack, even the dying curse of a demon whose head has been severed, but whose malice continues. The third old man simply smiled and pointed up the mountain. Follow the western ridge to where 3 stones stand in a triangle. There you will find a hidden path that leads directly to the fortress gates. The guards patrol every other approach, but that one they have forgotten, assuming the terrain itself provides protection. It does not. You can enter unseen if you approach at dusk when they are changing shifts and looking inward rather than outward. Yorimitsu stared at the gifts in his hands, at the old men who should not exist in this place, and understanding dawned. These were no ordinary travelers. These were the gods themselves, or their messengers, moved to intervene against evil too great for human strength alone. He dropped to one knee, and his warriors followed suit. Great ones, he said quietly, we thank you for this divine aid. We will use these gifts with honor and courage. We will end the demon's reign or die in the attempt, but we will not fail through cowardice or hesitation. We know you won't, the first old man said gently. That's why we aid you. Go now, climb the mountain, use the gifts wisely, and remember that even demon, kings have weaknesses, pride, confidence, the belief that their power makes them invincible. Shuten-doji loves company and storytelling when he drinks. Use that. Make him comfortable. Make him drunk. Then strike without mercy, because he will show you none. The 3 old men began to fade back into the mist, their forms becoming translucent, less solid, more spirit than flesh. The third called back one final instruction. When his head is severed, it will not die immediately. It will attack. That is when you must trust the divine helmet and your own courage. Do not flinch. The head will fall eventually, and the Demon King's reign will end. And then they were gone, vanished completely, leaving only the gifts and the first light of dawn touching the mountaintop above. The warriors looked at each other in the growing light, understanding that everything had changed. They had divine assistance now. The impossible had become merely terribly difficult. They had a weapon against the demon's strength, protection against his dying curse, and knowledge of a path to reach him unseen. "Well," Kintoki said after a long moment of silence, "that's more than I expected when we made camp last night." Tsuna was already checking his weapons, his expression focused. "We have the god's blessing and the god's gifts. Now we just need to be worthy of them. How far to those 3 stones, you think?" "A few hours' climb," Sadamitsu estimated, already planning the approach. "We rest today, scout this evening, approach at dusk as the Old One instructed. Strike tonight if we can get inside. The longer we wait, the more maidens die." Yorimitsu carefully packed the sacred sake and the divine helmet with their other supplies, his heart both lighter and heavier than before. Lighter because they now had actual hope of success. Heavier because divine intervention meant the stakes were even greater than he'd realized. The gods themselves wanted Shuten-doji destroyed. Heaven itself had weighed the Demon King and found him intolerable. This was not merely a rescue mission now. It was divine judgment, and they were the instruments of that judgment. The sun rose fully, burning away the mist, revealing the mountain's true height and terrible majesty. Somewhere up there, Shuten-doji stirred in his sleep, perhaps sensing nothing, perhaps feeling the faintest disturbance in the supernatural currents that flowed around his domain. Somewhere up there, captive maidens opened their eyes to another day of horror, not knowing that rescue approached with poisoned sake and divine protection, not knowing that this night might be their last in iron cages or their last alive, depending on whether 5 warriors proved sufficient to end a demon king's reign. The warriors of light began their final ascent. The mountain watched. The gods waited. And in his fortress throne room, Shuten-doji poured himself morning sake from a skull cup and laughed at some private joke, comfortable and confident in his terrible power, not knowing that his last day of existence had finally dawned. The 3 stones stood where the old man had promised, natural formations worn by wind and weather, but arranged in too perfect a triangle to be entirely chance. From there, a path became visible, not truly hidden, but simply overlooked, a game trail that wound along the western ridge where loose scree and vertical drops made passage seem impossible. But the warriors were skilled, and fear drove them forward. And by dusk, they reached the point where the ridge curved around the mountain's flank and the fortress came into view. It was not a castle in the traditional sense. Shuten-doji's domain was older than architecture, more fundamental than walls and gates. The mountain itself had been hollowed out, caves expanded into halls, natural caverns carved larger by supernatural strength and dark magic. The entrance they could see was massive, a mouth in the mountainside 20 feet high, 15 feet across, with columns of rough stone supporting the opening like teeth. Firelight flickered from within, and smoke rose from cracks higher up the mountain where underground halls vented to the surface. The smell rolled out even from a distance, sake and blood and rot, the reek of the predator's den, powerful enough to make strong men gag. But worse than the smell was the sound. Laughter, deep and booming, echoing from stone halls, clatter of pottery and metal, the noise of a feast in progress. And underneath, if you listened despite yourself, the sound of weeping, distant and hopeless, women's voices raised in prayer that went unanswered, begging for mercy that would never come. "The guards," Sadamitsu whispered, pointing. 2 oni stood at the entrance, each 10 feet tall with skin the color of rotting meat, wearing rough armor and carrying clubs that looked like whole tree trunks. Their tusks jutted upward from massive jaws. Their eyes glowed yellow in the falling darkness. They were laughing about something, passing a jar back and forth, drinking casually as they kept watch. They were bored guards, Confident guards, guards who had never faced a real threat, because what threat would dare approach the Demon King's fortress? Yorimitsu watched them and saw the pattern of their movement, the way they turned inward toward the fortress, more than outward toward the approach, exactly as the old man had said. The shift change had occurred at sunset, fresh guards replacing the day watch, still settling into position, not yet fully alert. There was a gap in their coverage when they both turned to look inside at some commotion, and in that gap, 5 warriors in Yamabushi robes moved silently forward across the exposed ground between ridge and entrance, using the failing light and the guards' inattention to cover their approach. They made it to the entrance, pressed against the stone wall beside the massive opening, hearts pounding but breathing controlled. Professional killers, waiting for the moment to strike or the moment to pass inside. The guards continued their casual conversation, oblivious. And then, from deep within the mountain, a voice boomed out, massive, authoritative, terrible in its power. "Bring me more wine. This barrel is empty and the night is young. Ibaraki, you lazy dog, where is my feast? Bring forth the girl in the 3rd cage. She's had enough time to marinate in her fear." Laughter followed, not just the Demon King's voice, but a chorus of Oni. A dozen voices or more raised in mirth at their captive's terror. The guards at the entrance chuckled as well, their attention fully drawn inward now. And in that moment, Yorimitsu led his warriors inside, padding silently past the massive guards, slipping into the shadows of the entrance hall, disappearing into the fortress before the Oni even realized anyone had entered. The entrance hall was vast, 30 feet high, its walls covered with crude decorations, skulls of various sizes, some human and some larger, arranged in patterns that might have been artistic or might simply have been convenient. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows. The floor was stained with old blood and littered with bones, some picked clean and some still bearing scraps of flesh. The smell was overwhelming here, but the warriors controlled their breathing, moved deeper into the mountain, following the sound of celebration toward the heart of the fortress. They passed side chambers, some empty, some containing sleeping Oni, some filled with stolen goods from a century of raiding. They saw weapon racks holding clubs and axes sized for creatures 10 feet tall or larger. They saw barrels of sake stacked to the ceiling, hundreds of barrels, enough alcohol to drown a village. They saw cages, most empty, but some containing huddled forms, women in torn silk robes clutching each other and staring with dead eyes at yet more visitors to their nightmare. Tsuna's hand moved toward one cage, instinct to free the captives immediately. But Yorimitsu caught his wrist and shook his head. Not yet. If they freed the captives now, if any alarm was raised before the Demon King was dead, all would be lost. The captives would die in the resulting chaos, and the warriors would be torn apart by a dozen enraged Oni. They had to reach Shuten-doji first, had to get the poisoned sake into his massive hands, had to wait for the divine weapon to take effect before revealing their true purpose. The great hall opened before them suddenly, a cavern so vast its ceiling disappeared in darkness above torchlight. And there, seated on a throne carved from a single massive boulder, 50 feet above the floor on a raised platform accessed by crude stone stairs, sat Shuten-doji. The stories had not exaggerated. If anything, they had understated the Demon King's terrible majesty. He was indeed 50 feet tall, his body proportioned like a human's but magnified to impossible scale. His skin shifted, colors as they watched. One arm yellow as sulfur, one blue as deep water, one black as charcoal, one white as bone. 15 eyes bulged from his face and skull, arranged in rows, all sizes, all moving independently to scan the hall below. 5 horns grew from his head, each thick as a temple pillar, each longer than a man was tall, curving upward and back like some terrible crown. He wore a rough robe that might once have been fine silk, but was now stained with sake and blood, hanging open to reveal a chest scarred with battles and rituals. His hands were the size of oxen, each finger thick as a warrior's arm. In one hand he held a cup, a human skull, still bearing scraps of flesh and hair, filled to the brim with dark liquid. In the other hand he held a leg, human-sized, half devoured, the bone visible through bite marks. Around him, Oni feasted. A dozen of them, ranging from 8 to 15 feet tall, sitting on the floor or crude benches, drinking from jars and eating from platters piled with meat that none of the warriors wanted to examine too closely. Among them, standing nearest the throne, was Ibaraki-doji, not as large as his master, but more refined somehow, almost human in his beauty, despite being clearly Oni, his skin pale and his features sharp, wearing actual armor that looked looted from a samurai lord's armory. He held a sword rather than a club, and his eyes were more calculating, more intelligent than the others. "Master," Ibaraki said, his voice cultured despite coming from a demon's throat. "The guards report no new arrivals. Shall we fetch your entertainment? The girl you requested?" Shuten-doji drained the skull cup, sake and blood running down his chin, and belched thunderously. "Not yet, Ibaraki. Let her wait. Let her fear build. Fear makes the meat tender, you know. Fear is its own seasoning." He laughed, and the other Oni laughed with him, the sound rolling through the hall like thunder. And then, in the entrance to the great hall, 5 Yamabushi stepped forward into the firelight. Silence fell immediately. Heads turned, eyes focused on the intruders, hands moved to weapons. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop as supernatural beings readied themselves to destroy these foolish humans who had wandered into their den. But Yorimitsu had expected this moment, had prepared for it. He stepped forward, staff in hand, prayer beads clicking. Every inch the confident mountain priest who had seen worse than demons and remained faithful to the path. He bowed with appropriate respect, not deep enough to show fear, but deep enough to acknowledge the power of the hall's master. "Great Lord of the Mountain," he called out, his voice strong and carrying despite the hall's vastness. "Forgive our intrusion. We are but humble Yamabushi, mountain priests seeking enlightenment through pilgrimage to holy peaks. We heard that a great lord dwelled here, powerful beyond measure, and we hoped to pay our respects and perhaps shelter for the night in your vast domain. The mountain paths are treacherous after dark, and we are weary." The hall remained silent. Ibaraki's hand moved to his sword hilt. Several of the lesser Oni rose to their feet, clubs ready. This was the moment. If Shuten-doji decided to simply kill them immediately, crush them like insects, devour them as appetizers before fetching the captive maiden for the main course, then all was lost. The poisoned sack would never pass his lips. The divine helmet would never protect them. The Demon King would continue his reign and eventually descend on the capital unopposed. But the old man's words echoed in Yorimitsu's mind. Shuten-doji loves company and storytelling when he drinks. Use that. Make him comfortable. The Demon King leaned forward on his throne, 15 eyes studying the 5 figures below, searching for deception, for hidden weapons, for any sign of threat. His intelligence was evident in those multiple gazes. This was no mindless monster, but a cunning predator, a being who had survived over a century through power and careful assessment of danger. And then, slowly, terribly, Shuten-doji smiled. It was an expression that had no human warmth, all teeth and malice and amusement at some private joke. Yamabushi, he rumbled, his voice shaking loose stones from the ceiling. Holy men, seekers of enlightenment. He laughed, the sound like boulders rolling down a mountainside. And you seek shelter in the Demon King's fortress? Either you are the bravest fools in Japan, or you truly have no idea where you've wandered. We have heard tales, Yorimitsu admitted, maintaining the role perfectly, of a great lord on this mountain. Powerful, yes. Fearsome, certainly. But we did not think such a lord would turn away holy men who meant no harm, and sought only rest before continuing our pilgrimage. Holy men, Ibaraki said coldly from beside the throne. Or spies from the capital? It's been months since anyone dared approach this mountain willingly. Shuten-doji waved one massive hand dismissively. Spies? Look at them, Ibaraki. 5 priests with staffs and prayer beads. If the emperor sent assassins, he would send armies, not monks. Besides, and here his smile widened, I enjoy company when I drink. My followers are loyal but poor conversationalists. And these Yamabushi, if they truly are wandering holy men, will have tales of the outside world, news from the provinces, perhaps even entertaining philosophy to debate while I finish my feast. He gestured broadly at the hall. Come then, brave or foolish priests. Approach and be welcome to Shuten-doji's court. Drink with me. Eat if you can stomach the fare. Tell me tales of your wandering, and I'll tell you tales of mine. But know this, and his voice dropped to a growl that made the torches flicker. If you prove to be other than you seem, if any betrayal or attack reveals itself, I will eat you alive, starting with your feet, and you will live long enough to watch me gnaw your bones. We are what we seem, Yorimitsu said, bowing again. Simple priests, grateful for your hospitality. Then come, sit, Shuten-doji commanded. Ibaraki, bring sake for our guests. The good sake, not the blood wine. Let us see if holy men can drink like proper companions. The warriors moved forward into the hall, surrounded by Oni, who watched them with hungry eyes and barely restrained violence. They were in the demon's den now, deeper than any human had ventured and survived. The throne loomed above them, and the Demon King watched with 15 eyes that never fully blinked, and one wrong word, one misplaced gesture, would see them torn apart before they could even reach for the hidden weapons beneath their robes. But in Yorimitsu's pack, carefully concealed, rested the jar of sacred sake, the poisoned gift from the gods themselves, and somewhere in the hall, captive maidens waited in iron cages, hoping for rescue. They couldn't imagine was mere feet away, depending on 5 warriors maintaining their disguise just a little longer, just long enough to turn demon hospitality into demon death. The feast continued. The Demon King poured more sake, and 5 heroes sat among monsters, waiting for their moment to strike. Sake flowed freely in Shuten-doji's hall, and the Demon King loved nothing more than to talk when properly drunk. The warriors sat on the floor before his throne, cups in hand, forcing themselves to sip from jars that, mercifully, contained only regular sake rather than the blood wine mixture the Oni themselves preferred. Around them, the lesser demons continued their feast, gnawing bones and drinking deeply, occasionally glancing at the humans with expressions that mixed curiosity with hunger. Tell me, priests, Shuten-doji said, his voice slightly slurred now from multiple cups, 15 eyes gleaming in the firelight. What brings you to these remote mountains? What enlightenment do you seek in such darkness? Yorimitsu answered carefully, his voice respectful. We seek understanding of the supernatural world, great lord. We wished to comprehend the forces that move beyond human ken, and we heard in our wandering that a powerful being dwelled on Mount O, one who had transcended human limitations entirely. Transcended. The Demon King laughed, and the sound shook the hall. Yes, I suppose that's one word for it. Transformed might be another. Changed, evolved, made into something greater than the weaklings who cast me out. His expression darkened, 15 eyes narrowing. Do you know what it is to be rejected, priest? To be hated for what you are rather than who you are? I cannot claim such experience, Yorimitsu admitted. Then let me enlighten you, Shuten-doji said, leaning forward on his throne, Sak forgotten for the moment as old memories surfaced. They call me demon now, monster, evil incarnate. But I was born human enough, in Echigo province to the north. Or perhaps it was Mount Ibuki. The tale's conflict in memory grows hazy after so long. But wherever I was born, I was different. Stronger than other children, stranger in my appearance. My eyes were wrong, my appetites were wrong. The village elders saw something in me that frightened them, and fear breeds hatred faster than any other emotion. He drank deeply, straight from a sake barrel held in one massive hand, liquid splashing across his chest. They tried to kill me when I was still small enough to kill easily, drove me into the wilderness to die. But I did not die, priests. I thrived. I found others like me, outcasts, criminals, those society had rejected. We formed a gang. We took what we needed. And I discovered I could change, could become. The more they hated me, the more monstrous I grew. The more they feared me, the more fearsome I became. Ibaraki, standing beside the throne, nodded in sympathy. I too was cast out, he said quietly. Beautiful, they called me, but wrong somehow, unsettling. They loved my face but hated my presence. So I left before they could drive me out, found my way to the master's side, and together we became what they always claimed we were, demons in truth, as well as accusation. Shuten-doji gestured toward his lieutenant with obvious affection. Ibaraki understands. My brother in transformation, my most loyal companion. Together we built our first stronghold in the Hira Mountains, gathered our followers, taught them the dark arts that could reshape flesh and soul. We were free there, priests, free from judgment, from fear of what we were becoming. We ruled those mountains for decades. His expression grew bitter. And then they built the temple, Enryaku-ji they called it, a great monastery on Mount Hiei, filled with monks chanting their sutras and burning their incense and radiating their precious holy power. The spiritual pressure drove us out like vermin before a fire. In 849, during the reign of Emperor Ninmyo, we fled here to Mount Oe, to these caves that no one claimed, to darkness that welcomed us when light would not. He looked around his hall, at the stone walls and the torches and the feasting oni. For over a century we've dwelled here, growing stronger, perfecting our arts, building our fortress, and plotting, always plotting, our return to the capital that rejected us. Do you know why I take their daughters, priest? Why I steal their noble maidens and feast on their flesh? Yorimitsu maintained his expression carefully. To feed yourself, I imagine. To remind them, Shuten-doji corrected, 15 eyes blazing. To remind them that their walls and gates and guards mean nothing to me. To remind them that what they cast out has become powerful enough to enter their very hearts and take what I please. And also, his smile returned, cruel and satisfied, because they taste better when they've been raised in luxury. Fear and privilege make an excellent seasoning. The other oni laughed at this, raising their cups in agreement. Yorimitsu forced himself to chuckle appropriately, playing the role of entertained guest, while his mind raced through calculations. The demon was drunk, getting drunker, loosening into confession and storytelling. This was the moment. This was when the sacred sake needed to be introduced, while Shuten-doji was comfortable and off guard, while the atmosphere was convivial rather than threatening. "Great Lord," Yorimitsu said carefully, "your tale moves me deeply. To be cast out unjustly, to transform through rejection, to build power from exile. There is a kind of nobility in it, despite what the capital's ministers might say. And speaking of what the capital says," he reached into his pack, drawing out the ceramic jar marked with divine symbols. "We carry with us a gift, sacred sake, blessed at the temple in Kyoto before we began our pilgrimage. We would be honored if you would accept it, as thanks for your hospitality and in recognition of your power." The hall grew quiet. Ibaraki stepped forward, hand on sword hilt, suspicious. "Sacred sake? From Kyoto's temples? And you offer it to the demon king? What kind of blessing seeks to touch Oni lips?" Yorimitsu met his gaze steadily. "A blessing of understanding, of recognition that power takes many forms. The monks who blessed this sake did not know we would offer it to you, great lord, but we judge it appropriate. You are a being of supernatural might. Why should you not receive sake blessed by supernatural means? Perhaps it will taste better for the blessing. Perhaps the contradiction will amuse you. Either way, it is freely given, with no malice." Shuten-doji studied the jar, 15 eyes examining it from every angle, searching for deception. The moment stretched. If he refused, if he suspected poison or trap, the entire plan would collapse. The warriors would have to fight, here and now, against overwhelming odds without the advantage they desperately needed. And then the Demon King laughed, loud and genuinely amused. "Sacred sake for a demon. The irony is delicious, priest. Perhaps more delicious than the sake itself. Very well, I accept your gift. Pour me a cup. No, pour everyone cups. Let all my court drink this blessed vintage and see if holiness tastes different than normal rice wine." Yorimitsu's hands remained steady as he poured the sacred sake, first to Shuten-doji himself, filling a massive cup that required both hands to lift, then to Ibaraki, then to the other Oni, moving among them with a priest's calm dignity, serving poison with a smile, offering death with a bow. The Demon King raised his cup. A toast to outcasts and demons, to power built from rejection, to the fall of those who judge what they don't understand. Drink deep, my brothers. Tonight we celebrate with holy men and blessed sake, and tomorrow we will plan our next raid on the capital that still doesn't understand we cannot be stopped. The Oni drank. All of them, following their king's example, raising cups and draining them in long gulps. The sacred sake passed down demon throats, working its divine magic, beginning the process that would turn supernatural strength into supernatural weakness, that would make the unkillable vulnerable to mortal blades. Yorimitsu and his warriors pretended to drink from their own cups, bringing them to their lips but swallowing nothing, maintaining the illusion while watching carefully for signs that the poison was taking effect. At first, nothing seemed to change. The Oni continued their feast, their laughter, their casual dominance of the hall. Shuten-doji called for the jar to be refilled, drank another cup, then another, praising the flavor and the irony equally. But then, gradually, the changes began. Ibaraki yawned, a gesture oddly human and vulnerable from the demon lieutenant. One of the lesser Oni stumbled slightly while reaching for more meat. Another's eyes began to close, then snapped open, then began to drift shut again. The laughter in the hall grew quieter, slower, like a mechanism winding down. The sacred sake was working its divine magic through demon veins. Shuten-doji himself began to sway on his throne, 15 eyes blinking at different rates, some closing while others struggled to stay open. His massive head drooped forward, then jerked back up, the 5 horns catching firelight as he fought against the sudden, overwhelming drowsiness that had seized him. "Strange," he rumbled, his voice thick and confused. "This sake, very strong, very..." His words trailed off. His eyes closed, one row at a time, 15 orbs of supernatural perception going dark like extinguished lanterns. Around the hall, Oni collapsed. Some fell face first into their feast platters. Some slumped against walls. Some simply toppled sideways like felled trees, hitting the stone floor with crashes that shook dust from the ceiling. Ibaraki tried to draw his sword, some final instinct warning him of danger, but his hand couldn't grip the hilt. He looked at Yorimitsu with dawning understanding and betrayal in his eyes, and then he too fell, crumpling to the floor beside his master's throne. The hall fell silent except for the crackling of torches and the heavy breathing of unconscious demons. The sacred sake had done its work. The supernatural strength that made Oni invincible had drained away like water through a broken cup. They lay helpless, vulnerable, mortal in their weakness, even if still massive in their size. Yorimitsu rose to his feet, shedding the pretense of priestly calm. Around him, his 4 heavenly kings did the same, throwing off their outer robes to reveal armor beneath, drawing weapons that had been concealed under layers of religious garb. Kintoki unslung his massive axe. Suetake flexed his wrestler's hands. Sadamitsu drew his sword with grim satisfaction. Tsuna moved toward the throne stairs, his blade already out, his expression focused and deadly. "Now," Yorimitsu commanded quietly, "before the magic fades, before they wake, we end this now." They climbed the stairs toward Shuten-doji's throne, toward the unconscious form of the demon king slumped in sake-drugged sleep, toward the monster who had terrorized the capital and devoured innocents for months uncounted. The massive body sprawled across the throne, 50 feet of demonic power rendered temporarily helpless, breathing deeply in enchanted slumber, unaware that his last moments of existence had arrived. "Hold his limbs," Yorimitsu ordered. "Pin him down. If he wakes during the strike, we need him immobilized." Kintoki took the yellow arm, wrapping both his own arms around the massive limb and bracing his feet against the throne. Suetake grabbed the blue arm with a wrestler's grip that had pinned Oni before, though never one so large. Sadamitsu and Tsuna each took a leg, one black, one white, massive as tree trunks, requiring all their strength to hold in place. The demon's breathing continued, deep and regular, the sacred sake keeping him under while mortal men prepared to deliver divine judgment. Yorimitsu drew Higekiri from its scabbard, and the blade sang as it cleared the sheath, a clear note in the silent hall. The sword was ancient, passed down through generations, forged by masters whose names had become legend. It had tasted demon blood before, had ended supernatural evil in Yorimitsu's skilled hands, but never had it faced a target like this, 50 feet of demon king, skin shifting colors even in sleep, 5 horns crowning a head the size of an ox. He positioned himself carefully, studying the massive neck, finding the point where one perfect cut might sever the head entire. The divine helmet rested on his head now, the gift from the old man, from the gods themselves, light as silk but strong beyond earthly metal. He would need it. The old man's warning echoed in his mind. When his head is severed, It will not die immediately. It will attack. Yorimitsu raised Higekiri high, the blade catching torchlight, gleaming with purpose and divine sanction. Around him, his 4 heavenly kings held the demon's limbs with all their considerable strength, ready to restrain any waking movement. In the hall below, Lesser Oni lay unconscious, temporarily harmless. In iron cages somewhere in the fortress depths, captive maidens waited without knowing that their salvation hung on the next few seconds. The warrior took a breath, centered himself, found the calm space where swordsmen lived, where thought vanished and only action remained, where training and instinct merged into perfect execution. This was the moment. This cut would end the Demon King's reign or fail, and doom them all. Higekiri fell in a perfect arc, driven by legendary skill and desperate necessity, empowered by divine blessing and mortal courage. The blade met the demon's neck and cut through, impossibly clean, impossibly perfect, as though the flesh itself recognized the inevitability of this ending. Supernatural, skin that should have turned the blade like steel, parted like water. Muscle thick enough to stop spears offered no resistance. Bone that should have shattered swords broke cleanly under the cut. The head separated from the body with a sound like thunder rolling through mountain valleys. And Shuten-doji woke screaming. The bellow that erupted from the severed head shook the fortress to its foundations. 15 eyes snapped open simultaneously, all blazing with rage and agony and terrible understanding. The massive body convulsed, limbs thrashing despite the warrior's best efforts to hold them. Black blood fountained from the neck stump, spraying across the throne room in great arterial pulses, steaming where it hit stone, hissing like acid where it splashed on metal. Betrayed? The head roared, the voice coming from a throat no longer connected to lungs, but powered by demonic will that refused to accept death. I've been betrayed. Kill them. Kill these enemies. Tear them apart. The body's thrashing grew more violent. Kintoki lost his grip on the yellow arm, was sent flying across the platform, crashed into the stone wall with force that would have killed a normal man. Suetake held onto the blue arm, but was being dragged across the platform, his wrestler's strength insufficient against a demon's death throes. Sadamitsu and Suna clung desperately to the massive legs, trying to prevent the body from standing, from rising to slaughter them all, even without its head. But the true danger was not the body. The severed head lifted into the air, rising despite having no wings, no support, suspended by pure demonic will and hatred that transcended physical law. The mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing teeth like daggers, each one long as a dagger, the throat beyond glowing with supernatural fire. The 15 eyes fixed on Yorimitsu, tracking the man who had struck the killing blow, and the head flew straight at him like a boulder hurled from a catapult. Yorimitsu stood his ground. Terror screamed at him to run, to dodge, to flee from the flying nightmare bearing down on him with snapping jaws and eyes burning with malice. But the old man's words held him steady. Trust the divine helmet. Do not flinch. And so he remained motionless as the head crashed into him, as the massive jaws closed around his upper body, as teeth scraped against the helmet's divine protection, as the Demon King's final attack met the god's gift and found it impenetrable. The teeth could not pierce the blessed metal. The jaws could not crush through divine workmanship. Shuten-doji's head bit down again and again, trying to devour the man who had killed him, but each time the helmet turned aside, fangs that had torn through steel deflected force that had shattered stone. Yorimitsu felt the impacts like hammer blows, but stood firm, protected by divine intervention, waiting for the demon's fury to exhaust itself. "You cannot win," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the horror inches from his face. "Your reign is ended. Your evil is finished. The gods themselves have judged you and found you wanting. Be at peace now, or remain in agony. Either way, you are done." The head pulled back, hovering in the air, 15 eyes filled with emotions beyond human understanding, rage and despair and disbelief, and something that might have been regret. The mouth opened to curse, to condemn, to speak some final declaration of defiance against the fate that had caught him. But what emerged instead was almost gentle, almost human. "There is no side path for Oni." The words hung in the air, cryptic and sad, the Demon King's final statement. Perhaps an acknowledgement that his transformation had been irreversible, that once you became a monster, there was no road back to humanity. Perhaps a lament that he had been forced onto a path with only one destination. Perhaps simply confusion as death finally claimed what should have died already. The light faded from the 15 eyes, one by one, darkness spreading across supernatural pupils. The mouth went slack. The head began to fall, no longer supported by demonic will, just dead weight succumbing to gravity. It hit the platform with a crash that cracked stone, rolled once, and lay still. The 5 horns no longer gleamed, the skin no longer shifted colors. What remained was just flesh and bone, massive and terrible, but finally, completely, utterly dead. Behind Yorimitsu, the body had ceased its thrashing. The limbs lay still, 4 different colors going gray as blood stopped flowing. The torso slumped forward, lifeless, just meat now, rather than a demon king. Kintoki pulled himself upright, bruised but alive. Suetake released the arm he'd been holding, breathing hard. Sadamitsu and Tsuna stepped back from the legs, their armor soaked with black blood, their expressions shocked and relieved in equal measure. For a long moment, the 5 warriors simply stood on the platform, surrounded by the corpse of the Demon King, unable to quite believe that the impossible had been accomplished. That Shuten-doji, who had terrorized the realm for over a century, who had seemed invincible in his power and immortal in his evil, lay dead at their feet. That 5 mortal men, aided by divine gifts and desperate courage, had ended what should have been unendable. Then, from the hall below, groaning. The lesser Oni were beginning to wake from their enchanted sleep, the sacred Seik's effects wearing off, supernatural strength beginning to return, and these Oni, loyal to their dead king, would tear the warriors apart in revenge if given the chance. "The captives," Yorimitsu said, voice hoarse but commanding. "Kintoki, Tsuna, find the maidens and free them, quickly, before the Oni fully wake. Sadamitsu, Suetake, with me. We clear a path to the entrance and hold it while the captives are brought out." They moved with professional speed, warriors who had fought together long enough to work without needing detailed orders. Kintoki and Tsuna vanished into the fortress depths, following the sound of weeping to where iron cages held the surviving captives. Yorimitsu, Sadamitsu, and Suetake descended from the platform, moving through the hall where Oni were struggling to their feet, still groggy from the poisoned sake, but growing more alert and hostile with each passing second. The first Oni to fully wake roared and charged, swinging a massive club. Yorimitsu's blade flashed, and the creature fell, ichor spreading across stone. Another attacked, and Sadamitsu's sword found its throat. Suetake grappled with a third, his wrestler's strength sufficient against an Oni still weakened by sacred Saik, throwing the creature into a wall where it collapsed and moved no more. but there were too many. Even weakened, even leaderless, the demon gang was formidable. If all of them woke fully, if they organized their defense, 5 warriors couldn't hope to prevail. The mission would end in victory, but not survival. The demon king dead, but his killers dead as well, and the captives still trapped in the fortress depths. Then, from the entrance, a new sound. Not Oni, not demons, but human voices raised in Buddhist chants, powerful and resonant. Holy words spoken with conviction and faith. The sutras that warded against evil. The prayers that pushed back darkness. Reinforcements. The emperor must have sent Buddhist monks behind the warriors, perhaps guessing that even if the heroes succeeded, they would need help extracting themselves and the captives. The monks' chanting filled the hall, and the waking Oni recoiled from the sound. Supernatural beings harmed by spiritual power, their flesh burning where holy words touched them. The Oni began to flee, scattering into side passages, retreating deeper into the mountain, their courage broken by their king's death and the assault of sacred chanting. Some collapsed and died, too weakened by the sacred Seika and too assaulted by the sutras to maintain existence. Some simply vanished, demonic forms dissolving when the will that sustained them failed. The fortress that had been Shuten-doji's seat of power for over a century was being purified, sanctified, the supernatural evil burned away by holy intervention. Kintoki and Suna emerged from the depths, supporting and carrying 9 women in torn silk robes, the surviving captives, the maidens who had endured hell and lived to see rescue. 9 out of 15 who had been taken. 6 had died in the fortress, devoured or died of despair, or simply broken by horror beyond bearing. But 9 lived, and 9 could return to their families, could testify to the evil that had been ended, and the heroes who had ended it. The monks parted to let the warriors and rescued pass, maintaining their chanting, holding back any Oni that might still lurk in the darkness. Yorimitsu looked back once at the fortress entrance, at the great hall where Shuten-doji's corpse lay in 2 pieces, at the throne that would never again seat a demon king, at the shadows that were already fading as evil's hold on the mountain weakened. "Burn it," he ordered the monks. "Purify everything. Let no trace of his dark magic remain. Make this a holy mountain again, a place where travelers can pass without fear." The monks bowed their agreement and began their work, spreading blessed oils, lighting sacred fires, chanting sutras of purification and banishment. Behind the warriors, as they descended the mountain with their rescued captives, smoke began to rise from Mount O, black at first and then white as the cleansing flames did their work. The fortress burned, the demon's legacy burned. The century of terror ended in flame and prayer, in victory and relief, in mortal courage, blessed by divine support, achieving what should have been impossible. They carried one thing with them besides the survivors. Shuten-doji's severed head, wrapped in blessed cloth, massive and heavy even without its body, proof of the deed, testament to the victory, a trophy to present to the emperor and the grieving families, showing that their daughter's abductor had faced justice, that evil had been answered with righteous violence, that heroes still walked the earth when they were needed most. The descent from Mount O took 3 days. The rescued maidens recovered slowly, finding strength in sunshine and safety, weeping for lost companions, but grateful beyond words to be alive and free. The warriors took turns carrying the demon's head, its weight physical and spiritual both, the burden of having ended a life even when that life had been monstrous. Ahead lay Heian-kyo, the capital that would rejoice in their return. Behind lay the mountain, smoking and purifying. being reclaimed from darkness. And in the warriors' hearts lay the knowledge that they had done what was necessary, what was right, what was commanded by heaven and earth both. The demon king was dead. The long nightmare was over, and dawn was breaking on a new era, where Mount O would be just a mountain again, where noble families could sleep without fear of shadows stealing their daughters, where the name Shuten-doji would pass from immediate terror to historical caution to legend that persisted across centuries. They walked toward the capital, toward celebration and honor, toward rest after impossible duty. 5 warriors and 9 survivors descending from the mountain where they had faced the king of demons and emerged victorious through courage and cunning and divine blessing combined. The mountain watched them go, silent now, its screaming finally stilled. The gates of Heian-kyo opened to receive the returning heroes like a flower opening to sunlight after long darkness. Word had somehow spread, perhaps through the monks who had assisted in the purification, perhaps through supernatural means, perhaps simply through the hope that had burned in the capital since the warriors departed. And the streets were lined with people, nobles and commoners both, pressing close to see the men who had done the impossible. At the front of the procession walked Minamoto no Yorimitsu, his armor still stained with black demon blood, his face showing the exhaustion of 3 months' tension released at last. Behind him came his 4 heavenly kings, each bearing the marks of battle, Kintoki limping slightly from where he'd been thrown against stone, Suetake moving with careful stiffness from wrestling with demon strength, Sadamitsu and Suna both visibly worn but upright and alert. And in the center of their formation came the rescued maidens, supported by warrior hands when their own strength failed, wrapped in borrowed robes over their torn silk, faces hollow but alive, alive, miraculously alive. The greatest burden came last, carried on a platform by 4 monks, covered with blessed cloth, but unmistakable in its massive size and shape. Shuten-doji's severed head, still 50 feet from the rest of its body, still bearing 5 horns and housing 15 closed eyes, proof beyond any doubt that the Demon King's reign had truly ended. The procession moved through the streets in silence, broken only by weeping. Joyful tears from those who recognized returned daughters, relieved tears from those who understood that the abductions would cease, prayers of thanks to every deity anyone could name. The autumn wind carried smoke from the still-burning mountain, a reminder of purification in progress, of evil being cleansed from the earth through fire and faith. At the palace gates, the Imperial Guard stood in formation, their faces showing emotions between awe and disbelief. Inside the palace compound, the highest nobles had gathered, and at the center, upon the throne in the Hall of State Affairs, sat Emperor Ichijo himself, waiting to receive his champions and hear their testimony. Yorimitsu and his warriors approached the throne on their knees, proper protocol despite their exhaustion, showing respect to the imperial authority that had commanded this mission. The rescued maidens knelt behind them, and the monks carefully set down the wrapped head before the throne platform, the massive bundle impossible to ignore. "Minamoto no Yorimitsu," the emperor said, his voice formal, but his eyes betraying deep emotion. "You departed our capital 3 months ago, on a mission all feared would end in tragedy. Yet you return with victory beyond our hopes. Speak now of what you accomplished on Mount O." Yorimitsu raised his head, meeting the emperor's gaze directly, and began his testimony. He spoke of the journey northwest, of the 3 old men who had appeared with gifts. He did not name them as gods, but everyone listening understood. the divine intervention clear in his description. He spoke of the sacred sake that could poison demons while leaving humans unharmed. He spoke of the divine helmet that could turn aside even a demon's dying curse. He spoke of approaching the fortress, disguised as Yamabushi, of being welcomed into Shuten-doji's hall, of the demon king's tales of displacement and transformation, his boasts of power and plans of conquest. He described the feast, the poisoned sake passed around, the gradual weakening of supernatural strength. He spoke of the attack, of his men holding the demon's massive limbs while he struck with hijikiri, of the clean cut that severed head from body, of the terrible moment when the severed head flew at him with snapping jaws and was turned aside by divine protection. He spoke of the head's final words, "There is no side path for Oni," cryptic and sad, a demon's acknowledgement of irreversible fate. He spoke of the lesser Oni scattered or slain, of the fortress purified by monks, of the 9 maidens rescued from iron cages, and the 6 who had not survived to see salvation. When he finished, silence held the hall for a long moment. Then Emperor Ichijo rose from his throne, a breach of protocol so significant that everyone present understood the weight of the moment, and descended the platform to stand before Yorimitsu. "You have saved our realm," the emperor said quietly. "You have ended a nightmare that threatened not just noble families, but the very stability of our rule. You have faced supernatural evil with mortal courage and divine assistance, and you have triumphed where triumph seemed impossible. All of Heian-kyo owes you and your warriors a debt beyond repayment." He gestured to attendants, who brought forward 5 boxes of lacquered wood inlaid with gold. "These contain wealth and titles, lands and honors sufficient to mark our gratitude. But more than material reward, you carry now the knowledge that you have done what few men could, faced the king of demons and emerged victorious, returned daughters to their families, given peace to a realm that had forgotten what peaceful nights felt like." The emperor's gaze moved to the wrapped head. "And this? What shall be done with the physical remains of the demon?" "Your Majesty," Yorimitsu replied, "with your permission, we would see it stored at Byodo-in Temple in Uji, in their treasure house where holy artifacts are kept. Not as a trophy to be displayed, but as a reminder and a warning that evil can grow powerful if left unchecked, but that courage and divine sanction can still prevail against even the greatest darkness." "Let it be so," the emperor commanded, "and let the sword that struck the killing blow be renamed in honor of this deed. No longer Higekiri, the beard cutter, but Dojigiri Yasutsuna, the demon child cutter, the blade that ended Shuten-doji's reign." Yorimitsu bowed deeply, accepting the honor for his ancestral sword, knowing that it would pass down through generations now, with this deed attached to its legend, that warriors centuries hence would tell the tale of how this blade tasted demon king blood and freed a realm from terror. The rescued maidens were led away to reunions with their families, to medical care and spiritual counseling, to slow recovery from trauma no one should have endured. Yorimitsu watched them go and felt satisfaction mixed with sorrow. Satisfaction that 9 lived, sorrow that 6 had died before rescue could reach them. Anger that anyone should have suffered what all 15 had experienced in Shuten-doji's fortress. In the days that followed, the city celebrated with festivals and prayers, Thanksgiving rituals at every temple and shrine, offerings made to the gods who had intervened to aid the heroes. The 4 monks who had carried the head to Byodo-in Temple reported that when they unwrapped it for storage, the flesh had already begun to dry and harden. The demonic essence drained away, leaving only physical remains that would slowly deteriorate over centuries like any corpse. The supernatural had fled with Shuten-doji's death, leaving only the natural behind. Artists painted scenes of the battle. Scholars wrote accounts of the demon's life and death. Poets composed verses celebrating the hero's courage. The tale spread through the realm. How Minamoto no Yorimitsu and his 4 heavenly kings had climbed Mount O, infiltrated the demon fortress, poisoned the demon king with sacred sake, and struck off his head with one perfect cut. How the severed head had attacked but been turned aside by divine protection. How evil had been ended through mortal courage blessed by heaven itself. Mount O stood quiet now, its fires extinguished, its caves empty and lifeless, slowly returning to natural mountain rather than supernatural fortress. Travelers began to use the passes again, though always with lingering nervousness, always with protective prayers murmured under their breath. The monks established a small shrine at the mountain's base, a place to pray for protection and give thanks that the darkness had been lifted, that the screaming had finally stopped. And in the capital, noble families slept peacefully for the first time in months, knowing that no shadows would steal their daughters, that the demon who had terrorized them was truly dead, his head stored in a temple treasure house, his body burned to ash on the mountain, his legacy ending in defeat and divine judgment. Yorimitsu returned to his estate and, for the first time in months, removed his armor completely, sat in his garden, and simply breathed the evening air without the weight of impossible duty pressing on his shoulders. His 4 heavenly kings joined him, sake poured, no words needed between men who had faced death together and survived. They sat in companionable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, each lost in their own thoughts about what they had witnessed on Mount O, what they had accomplished, what it had cost in fear and effort, and the nightmares that would probably haunt their sleep for years to come. But they had won. Against every odd, against supernatural power that should have been invincible, they had won. The impossible had been accomplished. The demon king was dead, and heroes could rest, knowing they had earned that rest through courage beyond measure and determination that never wavered even when the odds seemed most hopeless. The capital slept peacefully that night. The mountain stood silent, and 5 warriors, honored beyond words, simply sat together and let exhaustion finally claim them, secure in the knowledge that they had done what was necessary, what was right, what would be remembered for centuries, as the moment when mortal courage, aided by divine grace, ended the reign of Japan's most fearsome demon. The nightmare was over. The legend was just beginning. Years passed as years do, turning the immediate past into memory, memory into story, story into legend. The warriors who had faced Shuten-doji aged and eventually passed from the world, but their tale lived on, told and retold, embellished and refined, becoming part of the cultural fabric of Japan itself. Minamoto no Yorimitsu continued his career as a demon slayer, facing other supernatural threats: the spider Yokai Tsuchigumo, various oni that plagued the provinces, evil monks who had turned to dark practices. But none of these later battles carried quite the weight of Mount O. That victory remained his defining achievement, the mission that proved mortal courage could prevail against even the most overwhelming supernatural evil when blessed by divine intervention. His sword, renamed Dojigiri Yasutsuna, became one of Japan's most treasured blades, passed down through generations, its demon-slaying pedigree ensuring that it was treated with reverence and awe. Warriors who held it reported feeling a kind of weight to the weapon, not physical heaviness but spiritual significance, as though the blade itself remembered the moment it had cut through a demon king's neck and ended a century of terror. The four heavenly kings each found their own honors and continued service to the realm. Sakata no Kintoki became even more legendary for his strength, his red-skinned visage appearing in art and theater as the epitome of warrior power. Watanabe no Tsuna would later face Ibaraki-doji again. The demon lieutenant had not been in the fortress when it burned, and he survived to seek revenge against Yorimitsu's warriors, though he too was eventually defeated. Urabe no Suetake and Usui Sadamitsu continued to serve alongside their commander, facing threats both natural and supernatural, their loyalty and skill never wavering until age finally claimed them. The 9 rescued maidens slowly rebuilt their lives, though none ever fully escaped the shadow of their captivity. Some returned to noble families and eventually married, though their husbands had to accept wives who woke screaming from nightmares and flinched at shadows. Some chose religious life instead, entering convents where they could seek peace through prayer and service, finding a different kind of healing in devotion and contemplation. All of them, in their own ways, testified to what they had experienced, helping to ensure that Shuten-doji's crimes were remembered alongside his eventual defeat. Mount O itself transformed over the decades. The caves where the demon fortress had stood were eventually sealed by monks, protective sutras carved into stone, sacred ropes hung across entrances. The mountain returned to natural wildness. Trees grew, animals returned, the unnatural mist that had clung to its peaks dissipated. But the local villagers never quite forgot what the mountain had been. Parents warned children away from certain ravines and caves. Travelers still prayed before ascending the passes. The mountain had been reclaimed, but would never be entirely innocent again, forever marked by the century when a demon king had ruled from its darkness. Shuten-doji's head, stored in Byodo and Temple's treasure house, became the subject of its own stories. Some claimed that on certain nights, you could hear faint sounds from the sealed chamber where it rested. Laughter, perhaps, or grinding teeth, or whispered curses. Most likely these were just legends, the natural human tendency to attribute supernatural persistence to something that had been so supernaturally powerful. But the head was real enough, and visitors to the temple sometimes requested permission to see it, to witness physical proof that the Demon King had truly existed and had truly been defeated. Over centuries, the head deteriorated as all organic matter must. The flesh dried and blackened, the eyes withered, the horns became brittle. Eventually, the head was lost or destroyed. Accounts differ. Some say it was moved to another temple, and the records were misplaced. Some claim it was destroyed in a fire. Some insist it still exists somewhere, hidden in storage, waiting. The physical evidence faded, but the legend only grew stronger. Artists through the ages depicted Shuten-doji in endless variations. Sometimes he was shown at full terrible majesty on his throne, massive and multicolored and horned, the epitome of demonic power. Sometimes he was shown in his final moments, head severed but still living, flying toward Yorimitsu with snapping jaws, while the warrior stood firm beneath divine protection. Sometimes he was shown drinking with the disguised heroes, comfortable and unsuspecting, illustrating the theme that even the greatest power can be undone by cunning and patience. The tale appeared in medieval texts like the Oyama Ekotoba in the 14th century, where the story was told in detail with illuminated paintings. It appeared in Edo period woodblock prints, in kabuki theater performances, in puppet shows and folk tales told by traveling storytellers. Each generation found something new in the legend, sometimes emphasizing the horror of the demon, sometimes exploring his tragic origins as an outcast child transformed by rejection, sometimes focusing on the hero's courage, sometimes examining the necessity of divine intervention against overwhelming evil. Modern Japan still remembers Shuten-doji. Museums on Mount O display exhibits about the legend, tracing its evolution through Japanese culture. Manga and anime feature the Demon King as a character, sometimes as pure villain, sometimes as tragic anti-hero, sometimes even as a protagonist whose story is retold from his own perspective. Video games allow players to fight him, befriend him, even become him, exploring different interpretations of the century-old legend. But beneath all the variations and retellings, certain core truths persist. A powerful being ruled Mount O and terrorized the capital. Warriors were sent to stop him. They succeeded through courage, cunning, and divine assistance. The Demon King fell, and the realm was saved. These facts anchor the legend, the historical kernel around which centuries of storytelling have grown. And perhaps, in the end, that's the most important legacy. Not the demon's crimes or the hero's courage, but the enduring truth that evil, no matter how powerful, can be defeated. That darkness, no matter how deep, can be pushed back. That supernatural terror can be answered with mortal determination, when that determination is righteous and blessed by forces greater than either the evil or the heroes who oppose it. Shuten-doji represents many things in Japanese culture. The danger of displacement and exile, showing how rejection can transform humans into monsters. The necessity of divine intervention against threats too great for human strength alone. The power of cunning and strategy over brute force. The heroes who defeated him did not do so through superior strength, but through deception, patience, and striking at the moment of weakness. The persistence of evil even after death, shown in the severed head's final attack, reminding that darkness never dies easily and victory requires courage to the very end. He is also a cautionary tale about transformation, how humans can become monsters through dark practices, isolation, and embracing their worst impulses. Whether he was born cursed or became cursed through choices, whether his father was a dragon or he was simply human, all versions agree that he changed over time, growing more monstrous, less human, until he crossed a line from which there was no return. There is no side path for Oni. His final words acknowledge this irreversible transformation, this one-way journey from human to demon, from which there is no redemption, only eventual defeat. The tale reminds its listeners that some evils are so great they require more than human power to overcome. That courage matters, but is not always sufficient. That heroes must sometimes accept divine help and supernatural aid because the threats they face operate on a level beyond natural law. That there is no shame in this, no diminishment of mortal heroism, but rather an acknowledgement that the universe contains forces greater than human strength, and sometimes those forces must be called upon when facing darkness too profound for human light alone to dispel. But it also celebrates the human element. Yorimitsu and his 4 heavenly kings did not simply pray and wait for the gods to solve the problem. They accepted the mission despite impossible odds. They climbed the mountain. They entered the demon's den. They maintained their disguise under terrible pressure, forcing themselves to drink blood wine and witness horrors while keeping calm. They struck when the moment came, each man playing his part perfectly, holding the demon's limbs while their commander delivered the fatal cut. They faced the flying head with courage, trusting the divine helmet, but still requiring nerves of iron to stand motionless, while massive jaws closed around them. The gods provided tools and opportunity, but mortal hands wielded the blade that ended Shuten-doji's reign. Mortal courage climbed that mountain knowing death was probable. Mortal determination freed the captive maidens and ensured the mission ended in salvation rather than simply revenge. The legend honors both the divine assistance and the human heroism, recognizing that neither alone would have been sufficient, that victory required partnership between heaven and earth. This is perhaps why the story has endured for over 1,000 years and continues to be told in new forms today. It speaks to eternal truths about courage and evil, about transformation and redemption's limits, about the power of cunning over strength, about divine grace meeting human determination at the point where the impossible becomes achievable. Mount Oi stands today much as it did before Shuten-doji made it his fortress, a mountain like many mountains, forested and quiet, traversed by hiking trails and tourist paths. The locals know the legends, of course. They tell visitors about the Demon King, who once ruled from caves high on the slopes. They point out the approximate location where the fortress entrance would have stood. They mention the screams that echoed for 3 months before the heroes came. But mostly, the mountain is peaceful now, returned to natural rhythms, home to deer and monkeys and birds, its peaks wrapped in ordinary clouds rather than supernatural mist. Sometimes, on certain evenings when the light falls just right, when mist does gather in the ravines and shadows deepen in unexpected ways, you might feel a shiver, a sense of the mountain's history, an echo of the century when darkness ruled here and innocence screamed in iron cages. But it's just an echo. The demon is long dead. The fortress is long destroyed. The terror is long past. What remains is the mountain, beautiful and wild, and the legend that persists because humans need to believe that evil, no matter how powerful, can be overcome by courage and cunning and divine blessing combined. And perhaps, if you visit Mount O's and hike to the heights where the fortress once stood, if you sit quietly in the evening and listen to the wind through ancient trees, you might hear something beyond bird calls and rustling leaves. Perhaps the faint ghost of terrible laughter. Perhaps the echo of sake being poured. Perhaps the distant sound of 5 warriors climbing with determined steps toward impossible duty. Perhaps nothing at all except wind and memory and the enduring power of stories that refuse to die even when their subjects have long since turned to dust. The mountain remembers, even if the memory is faint now, even if the reality has faded into legend, has faded into tale told to children as they drift toward sleep. The mountain remembers a time when a demon king ruled and thought himself invincible, when darkness seemed insurmountable, and the capital cowered behind walls that couldn't keep shadows out. And the mountain remembers the 5 warriors who climbed with poisoned sake and divine protection, who infiltrated the fortress, who struck the impossible blow, who ended the reign of Japan's most fearsome Oni and carried his severed head down the mountain toward the capital that celebrated their victory with festivals and prayers and thanksgiving to every deity that could be named. The demon is dead. The heroes are dead. The rescued maidens are dead. Even the witnesses and their children and their children's children are dead. Dust now, all of them, mortality claiming everyone eventually regardless of heroism or monstrosity. But the mountain remains, and the legend remains, and the truth that the legend carries remains, that some evils require divine intervention to overcome, that mortal courage matters even when facing supernatural terror, that cunning and patience can defeat raw power, that darkness always thinks itself invincible until the moment light finds the perfect point to strike, and that sometimes, when duty calls and the stakes are highest and the odds seem most impossible, heroes arise to do what must be done, regardless of cost or fear or the probability of death. This is the legacy of Shuten-doji, the drunken demon, the sake drinking boy, the king of Oni who ruled Mount O for a century and fell in a single night when his own sociability became his weakness, and divine justice met mortal determination at the edge of a legendary blade. The mountain stands wrapped in moonlight now, quiet and peaceful, its dark history known but not oppressive. A place where humans can walk without fear, where children can play without danger, where travelers can pass without protective prayers spoken in nervous whispers. The purification that began when monks set fires in the demon's fortress continues even now, centuries later. Ordinary time and human presence gradually erasing the supernatural stain, returning Mount O to simple mountain rather than legendary battleground. But on certain nights, when the moon is dark and the mist is thick and the wind carries sounds from distant places, perhaps you might pause on a mountain trail and feel a shiver of old memory, old terror, old triumph. Perhaps you might remember, in some deep ancestral part of your mind, that once a demon ruled here and thought himself beyond defeat. Perhaps you might remember the heroes who proved him wrong. And then you would continue on your way, because the danger has passed, because the demon is long dead, because heroes did their duty and divine justice was served, and the nightmare ended as nightmares must, when courage rises to meet them. The mountain watches, the legend persists. And somewhere in the darkness and mist and ancient stone, perhaps the faintest echo remains of that last terrible moment when Shuten-doji, the demon king of Mount O, spoke his final words. There is no side path for Oni, and accepted at last the fate he had been fleeing for a century. There is no side path. There is only the path, forward or back, human or monster, life or death, terror or triumph. And on Mount O, over 1,000 years ago, that path led to a throne room where 5 warriors struck impossible blows and ended impossible evil and walked away with rescued daughters and a severed head, carrying proof that even demon kings can fall when courage and cunning and divine blessing converge at the perfect moment. Rest now, listener. Rest peacefully. The demon is dead and has been dead for centuries. The mountain is quiet. The capital sleeps safely, and if you dream of ancient battles and flying severed heads and warriors standing firm against supernatural terror, know that you dream of victory, of courage rewarded, of evil ended, and innocence rescued, and the triumph of light over darkness when the stakes were highest and the outcome most uncertain. The mountain is quiet now. The legend is complete. And you can drift into sleep, knowing that sometimes, against all odds, heroes succeed, demons fall, and the impossible is accomplished through determination that never wavers, and courage that never fails, and divine grace that meets mortal effort at the point where miracles become real. Sleep well. The demon king's reign is ended, the mountain is peaceful, and the legend lives on, whispered in the darkness, told across centuries, reminding all who hear it that no evil is truly invincible, that no darkness is truly absolute, and that courage, when blessed and determined and cunning, can accomplish what seems impossible until the moment it is done. The mountain stands, the legend endures, and Shuten-doji sleeps forever, defeated and destroyed, his name living on not as terror, but as cautionary tale, as reminder, as proof that even the king of demons can fall when heroes rise to meet him. Rest now. The tale is told. The mountain is quiet, and the night is peaceful, as nights should be. unmarked by screaming from iron cages or laughter from demon kings or the smell of blood wine flowing in cursed halls. The nightmare is over. The legend remains, and sleep claims all eventually, demon and hero alike, mortal and monster both, leaving only the mountain and the story and the eternal truth that evil, no matter how powerful, must eventually face justice, and justice, when righteous and determined and divinely blessed, never fails to find its mark. Sleep peacefully now. The demon king is dead, the mountain is quiet, and the dawn will come as dawns do, bringing light to the darkness and peace to the realm that heroes saved when they climbed Mount O, with poisoned sake and divine protection and courage that never wavered despite impossible odds. The legend is complete, the tale is told. Rest now in the knowledge that sometimes, when it matters most, heroes succeed, evil falls, and the impossible becomes real through courage and cunning, and the blessing of forces greater than either darkness or light alone. The mountain watches over the sleeping land, peaceful now, forever marked by legend, but no longer marked by terror. A place where demons once ruled, and where heroes once climbed, and where, in one perfect moment over 1,000 years ago, a sword called Dojigiri Yasutsuna cut through a demon king's neck and ended a century of nightmares with one perfect strike. Sleep well. The story is finished, the mountain is quiet, and all eventually finds peace.